Hey, what's up? It's Asia. Thank you so much for joining me again for another message. Tonight we are going to continue on breaking down my memoir, The Olive, Pressed Down and Refined. It's available on Amazon right now. We have been doing a mini series on the breakdown of this book. I am choosing to break down this book chapter by chapter because there was some really dumb moments, back where I was when I wrote this book, and my way of thinking back then, and then where God has me now, and my thought process on the things that took place back then as a healed and a whole and delivered woman of God. So I invite you guys to go back and look at chapters 1, 2, and 3. We're going to do 4 tonight, and it's just going to go deeper and deeper. I think I only have 8 chapters, so I pray that you guys will stay tuned in for them. If you would do me the honor of subscribing to this channel, if you like the content that's here, please subscribe to this channel, like it, and share it as well. Before we get started, I'm going to begin in prayer, and then we'll just dive in, okay? So if you wouldn't bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you so much for tonight. I thank you for this time. I thank you for everybody under the sound of my voice, God. God, I thank you for conditioning the hearts of your people to want to join me on tonight to hear what you have to say through me, Father. God, I pray that it's all of you and none of me. God, I pray that there is no nervousness, that there is, no fear, no doubt. God, it's just me and you, and your children. So I thank you again for this moment, this time. I pray that you will come in and have a seat and just have your way here, God. You are welcome here. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Okay. So, it's never easy reading, a chapter just straight through, just out loud like that, because you always start getting dry and start tripling over your words and things like that. And so I'm really just trying to work on that part. So just bear with me as I'm reading through this, because your eyes start doing funny things and everything. So okay, so chapter 4 is Dirty Secrets. Okay. It's Dirty Secrets, right? Okay, so here we go, y'all. Now that I filled you in on how I became Scott's wife and why I became an adulteress, and the main events and circumstances that caused things to fall apart, it's time to take you a little deeper. While things continue to spiral out of control in our home, Scott and I couldn't have been more detached from each other. He continued doing the things that pleased him, and so did I. One weekend on a Saturday night, I went out to the club with my Aunt Rachel for a night of dancing, socializing, and drinking. When it was time to go, laughing and talking on the way to the cars, I decided to do my usual after I left the club, and that was to send that text to my baby love. I text Badar asking him what time his lunch was, or at least I thought it was my baby love whom I was texting. But instead of getting the expected reply, I got a text from Scott saying, "Wrong person, babe." I shook my head, trying to refocus my vision after the several drinks I had had. I needed to make sure I was seeing correctly. Scott and Badar's phone numbers begin with the same 3 digits, and I realized it wasn't Badar, but it was Scott who had received my message. I could have gone into cardiac arrest. Oh shit, I said to myself. Then texted Scott back saying, "Sorry, I didn't mean to send that to you." "Who were you trying to send it to then?" "My girlfriend." After that, I didn't retry sending that message to my lover this time, but instead headed home as I obviously needed to lay down. On my way home, which was a short distance from the club, Scott called again, asking who the message was for. I said I'd already told him that it was to a girlfriend, but he knew I was lying and said he was on his way home. Once I made it to the house, I changed into my night clothes and went to sleep. Scott came home shortly after, flickering on the bedroom light and telling me to wake up. I recall raising my head up to look at him and then laying my head back down. I could tell he was angry and intoxicated as well. He said, "Man, you think I'm playing?" I said, "Get up." He pulled me by my ankle down toward the bottom of the bed, and I lifted up saying, "Look, don't put your hands on me." He proceeded to interrogate me about who the message was for and why I'd sent it. I guess I didn't answer the question to his liking because he smacked me in my face, and I felt like he had struck me as hard as he could. Scott is a big man at 6'1" and 230 pounds. Then he jumped on the bed and sat on my chest with his knees pinning down both my shoulders, yelling at the top of his lungs every time he hit my face. He hit me so many times that I began to black out. I begged him with every pause in between smacks, but he wouldn't stop. Being hit over and over again repeatedly, I was sure I was headed for a state of unconsciousness. But apparently he felt like it was enough for the moment, as he threw my phone at me and told me to call Badar, telling him not to contact me anymore. Shaking and crying uncontrollably, I somehow managed to get my fingers to dial the numbers. Badar knew I would normally have never called him at 4 a.m., so he answered, but he didn't say a word. I told him to please don't call me anymore, that I couldn't see him anymore, and I hung up the phone. While Scott was crying and yelling about what he was now going to do to Badar, pacing the wood floors, Badar started calling back to back. He knew I was in some type of trouble, and it was serious, and his concern upset Scott even more. After the phone finally stopped ringing, Scott tried calling Badar back, but because he thought I had Badar's number stored under my Aunt Rachel's number, he accidentally called her instead, the next moments working to my advantage. You see, he dialed my Aunt Rachel, but about the time she answered, he started yelling at me again and forgot he had made the call, so he set the phone down and she could hear everything. Before too long, my mother called and asked me what was going on and said the police were on the way. I said okay and hung up. I never forgot the rage in Scott's eyes when he said, "I'm going to torture you all night, and you're not going to sleep." I thought he was going to kill me. He ordered me to get up and go downstairs. Terrified of what he would do next, I stood up. He walked in front of me toward our wooden stairs. Then he stopped and turned around and, grabbing me by my hair, pulling me down the stairway face first. I couldn't describe to you how I imagined it was going to feel in the fleeting seconds when I saw what was going to happen just before it did. Let's just say the reality was far worse. I felt every step hit against my ribs, knees, and the rest of my body until finally I reached the bottom. I remember laying there screaming with my hands covering my face as he stood over me saying, "Now what?" I couldn't help but to wonder if my mother could hear her daughter screaming, "Somebody help me," through the walls, first of my house and then to hers. Scott kept carrying on, asking how I could do this to him, now knowing that all he had been going through. And then I heard our front door open. My Aunt Rachel came walking up the stairs and asked, "What the hell is going on?" "I talked to your mama and she called the police." I got up off the floor as fast as my busted up knees would allow and stood against the kitchen sink. Having forgotten my mother was sending the police, I was surprised by the sudden pounding on the door and the officers announcing themselves as KCPD. I let them knock until they went away because at this point, all I wanted to do was leave. Was it God who had made it possible for Scott to forget to lock the front door behind him and later call the wrong number, then quickly forget he had and set the phone down without hanging up, allowing my Aunt Rachel to hear all the violence taking place in my home that night? "You're wrong for doing her face like that," my aunt uttered to him. And as I walked past him to the nearest bathroom just to see how wrong he had been, Scott told her how I had been lying to him all this time. I remembered him saying as he was hitting me that I would hate him after this. And in the guest bathroom on the bottom floor, when I turned and looked at my face in the mirror, my body dropped to the floor like dead weight, unexpectedly like a person who faints. I was unrecognizable to myself. All I could do was scream to the top of my lungs the exact words he predicted I would feel. In that moment, he was right. I hated him. My lips were abnormally swollen, as well as parts of my entire face, black and blue in areas too. My eyes had broken blood vessels, and my ears were even swollen from him hitting me in the same spot over and over. I had never been hit by a man before in my life. I stood up and looked myself in the mirror again and said, "This is it." I walked up the stairs and didn't say a word. My aunt asked me, "Are you leaving with me?" And I said yes, and grabbed my phone and keys and went out the door. But instead of getting in her car, I got in my own. The sun was coming up, and I drove around thinking about where to go and decided to go to my best girlfriend's house. When I pulled up, I sat there for a minute, wondering if I wanted her to see me like this. I realized I didn't, so I drove off. The whole time I'd been gone, Scott had been calling and leaving voicemails, telling me he was sorry and to come back home. I drove around thinking of Badar, how I regretted allowing him getting involved in my mess, and how he must be worried. I called him, and I could feel the relief he felt to hear my voice. The first thing I did was apologize to him. Then I told him to go and find someone else, but he said no. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Do you want me to handle everything?" "No," I assured him. "I don't want any more trouble, and I'm going to file for divorce." Then he told me that since I didn't want him to take care of it, that I should stay away from him until my face healed because he couldn't bear to see me like that. I told him I would talk to him later, that I had some things I needed to figure out. Eventually, I pulled up at home, debating whether or not to go inside. Because I was sleepy and needed to rest, I decided I would. I can't recall where my kids were at this time, but I was thankful that they didn't have to witness what had just happened. From the car, I called my mother, who hadn't seen me either, and asked her if she would keep the kids until my face healed. In the past, Scott had done little things like pushed and shoved me, but never in a million years would I have imagined him going to this extent. But it turned out I didn't know him at all. When I got in the house, I found him asleep on the couch. I crept past him up the stairs and went to my kid's room and tried to get some sleep. It made me nervous to think that Scott could come back into the room and hit me again. Every time I dozed off, I kept hearing his voice so loudly in my head that it would cause me to jump in my sleep. The moment I opened my eyes, I said to myself, "I'm moving out of here." I found the strength to get out of bed, and after hardly any sleep, I got dressed for work. On my way out, I woke him up and said, "You have 30 days to find yourself somewhere to go, because I'm leaving and you're not coming with me." Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Hold on, y'all. Okay. Ashamed of how my face was looking, I went into work anyway. My supervisor knew of the affair, so it didn't take much for her to put two and two together. She wrapped her arms around me and asked me if I were okay. After I filled my coworkers in on what happened, she told me to go to a safe place and get some rest. We as women have different strengths, which enable some of us to deal with different treatments from others. I put up with Scott cheating ways for many years, but being beaten is something I'm not strong enough to endure. However, some women are willing to put up with physical abuse. Not passing judgment on the next woman, but if this is you, I encourage you to find a way out now. But, the truth is, I believe that when we put up with different kinds of abuse, it's because our perception of what it means to love and be loved is all wrong. You know, after Scott put his hands on me like this, like I didn't want him touching me at all. Like I felt like, you know, I don't want a hug from you. I don't want no kiss. Just don't put your hands on me. It's like after you put your hands on me in that way, in such a violating way. Like don't touch me, you know. And gosh, you know, there's so many women who endure this type of stuff, and then they lay down with this person, you know, every night, and they still, yeah, I just couldn't do it. You know, how dare you put your hands on me like that, in that kind of way? Like, no, you'll never touch me again. You know, it was terrible. By the grace of God, the lease on our house was 2 days from ending. And I don't think I've typed an intent to vacate so fast in my life. Meanwhile, for the next 30 days, I watched Scott sit in the same spot on the couch playing his video game. I honestly believe he thought that this time would be like all the others, that I was just talking and that I wouldn't leave. Every day when I returned home, I brought more and more boxes home and started cleaning out closets and throwing away things. It was all becoming real to me that life as I had known it was about to be over, and that Badar and I will finally be able to have each other. Scott sat around waiting until the last minute, and after realizing that his things were the only items left unpacked, he admitted he didn't think I would do it. After the 30 days were up, Scott had to go and stay with his dad, who lives out of town, and I moved in with my mother for 2 months, putting my things in storage until my new place was ready to move into in September. On moving day, Badar and a relative of his was generous enough to move me into my new place. This happiness I felt for my new start had me feeling like the worst ass whooping I had ever received in my life was also what set me free. Or was I really? The first day in my new apartment had me soaring above the clouds with excitement. The freedom I felt from breaking free from Scott and from the awful package deal that was attached to him was beyond compare. I could run my home the way I wanted without listening to anybody else's opinion. I could lay down in peace and wake up in peace, and would often think, what's that sound I hear? It was silence. Scott's number one line to use with me when we were arguing was, I paid for everything in this house. When you bleed every month, I pay for your pads too. So during my moving process, I made it my priority to take with me only the things I had purchased myself, which were my living room furniture and my kids' bedroom sets. Everything else I needed, I bought brand new, having it delivered the day I moved in. I knew especially I couldn't have Badar sleeping in a bed that I shared with in my marriage. After years of hearing Scott use financial support against me, I now pride myself of having a home fully furnished by God. While I was the happiest I'd been in years, this period was the saddest time in my kids' whole lives. They despised their new schools in its predominantly white district, which was making it hard for them to make new friends. They would argue amongst each other, and I would catch them individually crying at times. This would be the first time for them to live in a home without their father, and in their eyes, I was to blame. When their disrespect for me began to get out of control, I knew it was time to talk to my babies like adults. They needed an explanation for the circumstances that had taken them out of their comfort zone. I know people say you should keep your kids out of grown folks' business, but my children are advanced for their ages, and in any event, in my case, I had no choice. I prayed and asked God for his help before I sat them down for this painful discussion. Summing it all up, I told my kids that their father had been sleeping with other women for years, and that when mommy got tired of it, I did the same thing. And then their father found out. When their father found out, he got angry and beat me up. Yes, I explained to them how bad it was, and although it was hard for them to take in and accept, surprisingly they did. Sydney, as the oldest, asked, why would he do that? How did he feel like he had the right? I told my kids that their father is a good man, just not for me, and that we both made our share of mistakes. I also explained that now, like many families, we had to live in separate homes, but that it was going to be okay. I also assured them that they could see their father anytime they wanted to, and that their relationship with him didn't have to change. Having the truth explained to them about why their home was divided gave them a level of comfort. What also made this difficult time a little easier for them was that from an early age, thanks to my mother, my children had their own prayer life and relationship with God. In the meantime, things were going well with Badar and me, and had been together for 1.5 years now. We were getting along great. So after a few months of being on my own, I felt it was time to introduce him to the kids. Scott and I had agreed to let each other know when we decided it was time to introduce our kids to new mates. To my surprise, when I told Scott about the planned meeting, He didn't give me any trouble about it, even though he was still upset about the split. Badar didn't have any biological kids, and he was ready to accept mine as his own. And kids were not new to him. There had already been a sweet little girl in his last relationship who knew him as daddy. One stormy day turned out to be the big day. There were tornado sirens. There were tornado warnings and watches for every county in the state. And being terrified of tornadoes, I called Badar. I didn't want the kids and me to be alone. He bravely drove over to be with us despite the tornadic weather. I just told my kids that he was on his way and that I had someone that I wanted them to meet. I didn't tell them he was my boyfriend, just that we were friends. I didn't know if they were ready for any titles yet. When Badar got there, he was so kind in the way he introduced himself, and my kids, being accepting as they are, were open to conversation with him as well. He stayed with us for quite some time after the storm passed, allowing my youngest two to ask him 1,000,001 questions. However, Sydney, my oldest, was quiet and observing. I don't believe they knew what to think of him yet. Now that my kids had met Badar, he was able to come and go as he pleased. You know, what's crazy about that part, just allowing my kids to meet him, was that I didn't even take into consideration the trauma of the separation, you know, the trauma of the divorce, the trauma of them not having their dad, you know, living under the same roof anymore. You know, their whole, you know, system just uprooted and just changed like that. You know, instead of introducing them to a man, I should have introduced them to a counselor, you know, to get them some counseling, because I wasn't the only one that was broken by this. You know, Scott was broken too, but the kids, they were broken, and I didn't give them what they deserved. You know, they deserved to have had this done the right way, you know, but I was just so gone and just so unstable, you know, just unstable in all of my ways. Like, I can't think of not one way that I was stable during the entire relationship with Scott, during the entire marriage, during the entire relationship with Badar. Like, just no stability whatsoever. Mine just gone, you know. That hurts, you know, that I didn't give my kids what they had deserved, that I didn't know any better, you know. Okay, let's carry on. Now that I was fully his, it was also time for another big step in our relationship. Badar had to break me of some bad patterns of living and I developed in my marriage. One involved my spending habits, which came to the forefront when I fell on hard times a few short months after being in my new place. Oh, excuse me, y'all. Badar tried to teach me to stop living above my means, but I rejected his advice. Subconsciously stuck in my old ways, I was oblivious and felt like the way I was living was normal. Selfishly, over time, I began to think that he was just cheap. And one day, when he told me maybe he just couldn't afford something, I told him so and made a fool out of myself in the process. After living the fast life with Scott, I had to realize that wasn't my life anymore, and I needed to humble myself. But how was I going to break free of that if I want it, I'm going to get it mindset? Sometime mid-November, I lost my job. During this time, Badar was by my side, loving me and helping me through it all. I was so embarrassed by my downfall, though, that if I needed a bill paid or needed anything, I would hide it from him. When he first met me, I seemed to be doing pretty good for myself. So much so that at times he said, if he would be able to afford me. But of course, to me, it was never about the money with Badar. Now he would come over and open up the refrigerator and finding it empty, turning to me and saying, "Why didn't you tell me the kids needed food?" He would get so frustrated with me for always allowing my pride to get in the way of him helping me. But I didn't want him to know anything about this side of me or my financial struggles. During the winter months, my son was out of the state with his dad. And on the weekends and during the winter break, my girls were mostly with my mother, which left me and Badar lots of time to get to know the good, the bad, and the ugly about each other. I believe Badar had in his mind all the things he wanted to break me from once I became his. He no longer wanted me in the clubs wearing provocative clothing, for example, and this caused some resentment. I was used to doing what I wanted, and when I wanted, and didn't like anyone interfering in my business. So we argued day and night. We were together nearly every waking moment, which was okay until I spent time with other people. Although I'd complained about too many friends and family in our house in the past, I realized that I was more of a friend and family type, wanting to spend time with them socializing, whereas Badar was content with it just being only him and me. He wanted me to himself, and while the feeling was mutual, at times I would want to go out with the girls to celebrate an occasion, for instance. Yet for Badar, this was where the problem began. I recall talking to Badar on the phone on several occasions when I would be getting dressed to head out for a night of fun, and before I knew it, he would be using his key to let himself in the door. He would come and sit on the edge of my bed, watching me apply my makeup, waiting until I had gotten completely dressed before he would go in for the kill. He would lay back on our bed in silence with one arm covering his face, which was his way of luring me in to ask the question. Baby was wrong. Opening the door for him to start telling me all the reasons why he didn't want me to go and why I shouldn't. My baby would start saying things like, "Who's to say nobody would start shooting?" Or, "What kind of example are you setting for your daughters?" Or, "You can listen to all the music and drink all the drinks you want here at home with me. At least I know you'll be safe." Badar would say just about anything to keep me from going out to celebrate for just about any reason. And hell, after he got finished having his say, I would find myself undressing, wiping off my makeup, and finally making a call to let the girls to know I wouldn't be making it. This little fit of Badar's was cute at first, until it became something he did all the time, and then I will be honest and say it used to work my nerve. Not to say that Badar wasn't genuinely worried about my well-being, but ultimately, I believe he felt I was wanting to go out for the attention of other men. I will admit before Badar and I met, attention-seeking was one of my reasons for going out to the clubs, seeing that I wasn't receiving the attention I was craving from Scott. And after I met Badar, going out to the club was still okay, since it was a for sure way of us seeing each other while he was working the overnight shift. Once I left Scott, I had moved into my apartment. Once I left Scott and moved into my apartment, however, and Badar had me to himself, there was no need for that anymore. Now, if I did go out, it was only because of an invite, but Badar felt there was no reason good enough to find myself in the club scene anymore. In retrospect, I can see the immaturity in my decision-making when it came to putting up a fight about going out to clubs. I should have made Badar understand that I was receiving all the love, that I was receiving all the attention and wanted, I should have made Badar understand that I was receiving all of the attention I wanted and needed from a man, and that I was satisfied at home, that I was receiving everything from him. It wouldn't be long before the old patterns of my marriage would resurface, but in reverse. What I mean is that I began treating Badar the way Scott had treated me. Arguing back and forth was now what I specialized in. Complete with name calling, over talking him, walking out, hanging up in his face, and rejecting basically every word he had to say. I also wasn't used to a man wanting to sit and talk about our problems, much less be relentless about it, or sharing with me his feelings of how my disrespect was hurting him. I wasn't used to a man loving me as hard as Badar did, and at some point, it became overwhelming for me because of how tender he was with me. I often felt like his emotions were too soft. Eventually, I even wanted out of our relationship because of it. I had turned into my husband with Badar. Though I didn't see it, and Badar was in my old role. He would tell me that he felt I wasn't putting him first anymore, and that he didn't want to get to the point where he felt so hurt he no longer cared. You know, Badar took me straight out of a marriage. Broken. And he thought that he could fix me. He thought that he could love me and nourish me back to life. You know what I'm saying? And I was so broken and confused and in adultery and sinning and thinking that, I was just this whole woman with so much to offer him. And both of us, hearts deceiving us both. Now I'm talking about hearts deceiving us both. What did we expect was going to happen? What did we think was going to happen? We didn't even know. We thought we was doing everything right, didn't we? We thought we was making all types of adult decisions. Okay, y'all, this is the last page. This is kind of one of my longer chapters. For example, when Scott would call to see how the kids were doing, sometimes he would end the call by telling me he loved me. And one time I made the mistake of telling Scott I loved him back right in front of Badar, which understandably hurt him. Why would I tell Scott this? With the man I claim to love so much sitting right beside me? That was so wrong. Who knows how to have a husband and a boyfriend? I remember always feeling afraid of, whenever, even though I was gone from that marriage and me and Badar was with each other at that time, I remember the feeling, and I don't believe Badar ever knew this, but I remember the feeling of, looking out the window if I heard a car, sound like a car pulled up, or one that sounded like Scott's car, and, I would just get really nervous, you know what I'm saying? Kind of like my past creeping up, behind me. I never really felt free. So it was a lot of things that made me still react. My mind was still conditioned, you know what I'm saying? Like I was still married. Like it was I don't see how anybody, cheating just ain't for me. Cheating ain't for me. And trying to have somebody's, husband and boyfriend, that just wasn't for me. I sucked at that. Okay. Why would I tell Scott this with the man I claim to love so much sitting right beside me? What was my justification for putting Scott's feelings undeservingly above my love's? Did I actually mean it when I told Scott that I loved him? No, other than the love that I have for him as the father of my kids. I had fallen out of love with Scott long ago. I had planned on divorcing him, and he knew this was my plans. Badar, of course, urged me to speed up the process. The problem was that neither Badar nor I had the money for a divorce lawyer, and Scott told me that since I was the one who wanted the divorce, I would have to pay for it. Badar was frustrated because he thought I should have already filed for the papers by now, and this kept us arguing. He felt that if I didn't have the money for a lawyer, then I should have just printed off the papers and filled them out for myself. Although I argued back and forth about this, afraid and unsure if I knew how to do this on my own, in the end I realized Badar was right. and I printed out all 66 pages and began writing. A few weeks later, my financial responsibilities had become too much for me to handle. I was sitting in the parking lot of McDonald's, about to spend my last $7 to feed my kids. I remember crying out to God, asking him what it was he wanted me to do. I told him that I surrender and that I would do whatever it was he wanted me to do. Clearly, he wanted my attention because this was the day he called my name. After I sat there and cried a while, I bought my kids a burger and went home and fed them. And about a week later, God blessed me with the job I had been hoping for. In the meantime, however, I had received a disconnect notice from the electric company, and my car was up for repossession, so I needed to do something fast. I had no option but to file bankruptcy, which I did with the first paycheck I received. After I had been at my new job for a few months, it was Badar's turn to fall on hard times. We went through this difficulty together, and as he had been so good to me and my kids, helping me through our struggles, it was only right that I return the favor. During this time, as my longing for God grew stronger, I felt it was time for me to get back into church. In contrast, Badar, because of bad past experiences, was anti-church. He had vowed to never go back, which I respected as his choice, but I also knew the vision I had for my family. Okay, y'all. That concludes chapter 4. If you are still with me, thank you for hanging in there. I know that was one of the lengthy ones, but I hope you found it interesting. And that when we're all done with this, that maybe you'll go back and purchase the book if you haven't already. Read it for yourself so you don't have to worry about me getting all choked up on my words and stuff. But yeah. So, yeah, next we're just gonna go deeper and deeper each chapter. So like I said, I pray that you will come back for chapter 5, and so that we can get to the real good stuff. We can get to the God, to God, and what he was doing and how he was hanging on tough to me, So I'm excited about that. I'm gonna try to brace myself because it's one of them. These chapters coming up are one of some of the chapters that, I never really get to get through without tearing up. So you guys keep me in prayer, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. Please share this video, or just come back. Just simply come back, like and subscribe to this channel so that you'll get notifications when I upload videos, okay? Thank you guys so much. I hope that you have a good night. See you next time.